Good evening, everyone. My name is Elad Lapidot, and I welcome you all to the Berlin Center for Intellectual Diaspora here at the Catholic Academy in Berlin for this evening discussion event. Right now, at this time, many Jews around the world ask themselves many questions, difficult questions about the meaning of being Jewish in general and today. And this is done in the last month, perhaps more than before, in view of the dreadful violence that has been taking place in Israel, Palestine, on and since October 7, a violence that is in itself the culmination of an incessant and still ongoing oppression, occupation, expulsion, and violence that has been inseparable from the foundation and existence of a Jewish state in the Middle East. Göran Rosenberg, in his recent book, has called it, I quote him, the final collapse, morally and politically, of a Zionist vision for Jewish existence as it has materialized de facto in the state of Israel. In the same book, Göran Rosenberg speaks about, again, I quote him, the end of the state of Israel as a unifying symbol for Jews and Judaism.
But just to make sure, it's not in this book.
Is it? Oh, wow, did I write that? Yeah. I added a new preface, which I haven't internalized yet. So, okay, that's
so
good. Thank you.
Many versions of the book circle around.
Well, yeah, but I've written it in another book, so that's why I'm confused. Thank you. Sorry.
The current search by many Jews can be called, as the very title of the book says, the search for another Judaism, and I'm referring to the second part of the title. Another Judaism that they are searching with the hope of being able to identify with. Another Judaism that is not focused on the nation state, but instead on a different kind of collective existence that might be called diasporic, to echo here the very place that we're in, the Berlin Center for Diaspora, Intellectual Diaspora. However, beyond or with the diasporic alternative vision of Judaism, many Jews understand that this vision, their vision of what Judaism or Jewishness or being Jewish means today, this vision must also account in some way, relate in some way to Jewish existence in Israel, Palestine. So the search is also for another vision, even for the Jewish state. So you might say the search for another Judaism is linked to another search, and here is the first part of the title in my reading, another Zionism. What Göran Rosenberg does in his new book, as I read it, is precisely trying to look for this kind of a different vision for the future, another Zionism, another Judaism, but another vision for the future that is done by looking back through a memory, through a remembering of different visions in the past. Historical visions of Judaism, of Zionism, that were not realized, that were lost in history. And in fact, the book tried to tell the history of the losers, a history against history, against the winning part of history, against the grain, and again, to echo another diasporic thinker, perhaps Walter Benjamin, who plays an important role in the book. What could have been done differently? What kind of desire, passion, ideal, what kind of love even remained unrequited? This is what at stake at Göran Rosenberg's book that we are gathered here this evening to discuss. Another Zionism, another Judaism, the unrequited love of Rabbi Marcus Ehrenpreis. A certain vision of Judaism, of Zionism, that is guided not by Jewish sovereign power, by rather Judaism of peace. I'm very happy and honored to have here with us tonight the author himself, Göran Rosenberg, in what is, I understood, a world premiere of the English version of the book, the Uraufführung of this book. And with us also Susan Neiman, who accepted to join this conversation. So I will shortly introduce to you our two guests, and then we'll move to the discussion. Göran will present the book. Susan will give some comments, and then we'll discuss together. So Göran Rosenberg, an acclaimed Swedish writer and journalist, son of Holocaust survivors. He wrote his personal history of Israel. I will try in Swedish, Det förlorade landet, that was published in '96, was translated to German, Das verlorene Land Israel, eine persönliche Geschichte, and was published in Germany in '98. And it's forthcoming as well in English this year, hopefully. And it was shortlisted for the Swedish August Prize. His childhood memoir, A Brief Stop on the Road from Auschwitz, was awarded the 2012 August Prize and has been translated into no less than 13 languages, again, including German, and kurzer, Aufenthalt auf dem Weg von Auschwitz, published in 2013. And the most recent book, what we're going to discuss today, was published in Swedish in 2021 and just came out last month or the month before in English. Susan Neiman, who lives in Berlin, is director of the Einstein Forum. She was born in Atlanta, Georgia, studied philosophy at Harvard, completed PhD under John Rawls and Stanley Cavell, and she also studied at the Freie Universität Berlin and was professor of philosophy at Yale and the Tel Aviv University. She has published many books that were also translated to many languages. I will just mention a few of them. Slow Fire, Jewish Notes from Berlin, Evil in Modern Thought, Moral Clarity, a guide for grown-up idealists, Learning from the Germans, Race and the Memory of Evil, and Left is Not Woke. She's a member of the Berlin-Brandenburg Academy of Sciences and the American Philosophical Society, and also a member, a part of the Diaspora Alliance, an international organization that also works in Germany, and arguably tries to promote visions that are not dissimilar to what Ehrenpreis has in mind. All this we can discuss, hopefully, later. And for now, I will ask you to help me greet and invite Göran Rosenberg to present his book.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for coming. I'm honored and a bit still unused to the fact that this book, which is written in English, well, it was written in Swedish originally, but now it's in English has its Urpremiere in Germany. I wish it will be published in German as well, but I'm so glad. I'm so glad that Elad has understood, which not many people did, what a story of a dead rabbi, what relevance does it have today? And I advise people to don't try to understand too much, but read the book, and you will get the relevance. But that's not a good marketing strategy, especially if the book is a bit heavy or thick. But it's an easy read, I promise. Anyway, it is. Anyway, this title that Elad alluded to, it's a new title. The original title was really not inviting. It was The Unrequited Love of Rabbi Marcus Ehrenpreis in Swedish. Still people read it. But to get it out in English, I had to find something else. And reality helped me. The developments of the recent years have made it clear that we are faced with a development within Judaism and Zionism that in my eyes is horrifying, which means that just writing the title Another Zionism, Another Judaism gets its meaning from what we see is happening under the names of Zionism and Judaism. So suddenly the book, which is, as Elad said, an investigation into the past, gets a new relevance, I would argue, and increasingly so. So let me explain why I wrote this book, why I decided to write the book about this rabbi. It came out in 21, so it's not that old. I'm a Jew, first of all. I'm the son of Holocaust survivors. Both my parents were in Auschwitz. Came to Sweden in 1945. I've written another book, which you also mentioned, A Brief Stop on the Road from Auschwitz, which is about that part of me. It's my childhood memoir as a child born with parents surviving the Holocaust. And before that, I wrote my the Israeli part of my history, which formed me very much. It was very young, 13, 14 years old when we emigrated to Israel. Actually, that book chronologically succeeds the childhood memoir. So if you read them in the reverse direction, you will get it chronologically right. But then you start reading this, and you will get it chronologically very wrong, because I'm going back again. Because what I had explored was, let's say, the Holocaust or the Shoah influence on my Jewish life, which is there. And in a short history with Israel, it was the Zionist part of my history, which was also significant, but remained the Jewish part. Because I was born a Jew. I was born a Jew in a generation where, in my view, you had no choice. There was no, I don't want to be a Jew. You couldn't say that. You couldn't say, I don't want to be a Jew if you're a son of Holocaust survivors. That would give Hitler a posthumous victory. That was sort of the truth. So, and eventually, during my life, I came to understand, okay, I have to be a Jew, no choice, but what otherwise would make me a Jew, except that Hitler wanted to kill me, and being a Zionist in Israel, which those who will read the book will understand that I came to the conclusion that was not for me. So what remained? What was there in Judaism? Was there anything in Judaism that could attract me, that I could say, yes, fine, I'm glad, I'm happy to be a Jew? Not because people hate me, that's not a good reason, or at least reason enough. For many people, there is a reason in that. Anti-Semitism is a part of Jewish identity for many, unfortunately, many people, even Israelis. So these two pillars of Jewish identity were not for me. So where would I find that Judaism? I didn't know very much, and I realized I wanted to explore the Jewish word from which I came, from which my parents came, the word of European Jewry. And by coincidence and accident, I want to explain that, it's explained in the book, I happened to meet this guy. He was dead. He died 3 years after I was born, so we passed each other briefly in life. And for other coincidences, I happened to be given as a gift his collected, well, a lot of work that he had written that I had no idea of. So, and some friends said to me, "Do you want to have this?" It was a journal, many years of a journal that he had published in Swedish. "Yes, please, I would like to have that." Anyway, a long story short, I decided that he would be my Virgil into that Jewish past that I wanted to explore, in search of a Judaism that I would like. So that's the background to this story. I have no clue how interesting this guy would be. I thought he was a Swedish rabbi. Yeah, he was. He was for a long time during a very dramatic period in Jewish and European history. He was the chief rabbi of Stockholm from 1914 to 1948, when I was born. But then I realized this guy came to Sweden when he was 45. He had already an enormous life before him. Among them, organizing the first Zionist Congress in Basel together with Herzl, and many other things. So, and I will now present to you this guy briefly, because you will have to read the book to get the whole thing, but briefly try to, and I will start with a quote that from him in 1946, because this is somehow, it's emblematic for, summarizes basically what I saw in his Judaism. He expresses then what he called the question of Israel. And I read it to you. The question was then, way back, and still is today, and will become even more pertinent tomorrow. Can the world be reordered so that ethnic and territorial borders will be made to coincide? And if this cannot be done, and hardly anyone in his right mind believes that it can, should any country have the right by divine and human law to deprive the minorities living within its borders or within provinces conquered by war, peoples of a different historical origin and of a different faith from that of the ruling majority, of their freedom and life opportunities? And to me, that summarizes somehow the Judaism of Marcus Ehrenpreis. Now, where did he come from? And let me first of all, and I think Elad alluded to that, this is this is history. And I call it right up front, this is the history of a lost cause. Lost simply because this Judaism, or this world from which he came and from which I came, was destroyed. Literally destroyed. So, and also the visions that they were able to have, because they were based on another perception of reality. They weren't based on a reality where there would be a Holocaust. They were still vibrant and vivid and possible. While when I write this book, I know that this is not possible in that sense. That word doesn't exist. Auschwitz would be there, and whatever came after in Israel will be there. So there is, but I still wanted to see what made him tick, what made him want to be and also propagate a version of Judaism that I would find attractive. And it's, as you can see, it's a Judaism that that speaks for a universal version of a universal existence as a minority among minorities for Jews. Anyway, he was born in this very interesting period in the 19th century, where the old Jewish word was slowly vanishing, in the sense that in large part of Europe, not all of it, the old ghetto, not ghetto of the Nazi kind, but the Jewish shtetl, the Jewish societies, tight-knit, were dissolving, confronting the Enlightenment and confronting the the new modern states that wanted to give Jews or allow Jews to become citizens and so forth. So. And he was a child of that word, very much. So he he was a rebel, but he was a child of it. So he wanted to rebel that many wanted. They wanted to be part of the new Europe. They wanted to be part of the new world, but they didn't want to leave their Judaism behind. And they feared that the attempts that had been made before for Jews to become citizens of Europe had failed, because there was also the demand, tacit demand, that in order to become an equal citizen of Europe, you should somehow do away with your Judaism, or slightly or slowly. So that was a price to pay. And that price didn't even suffice, because anti-Semitism didn't go away. It actually grew in many senses while they were trying to accommodate. So this was a generation. You see, Marcus on the left. This is Father Jacob there on the right, and you can see the two worlds standing side by side. So he comes out there, you know, well-dressed young man, and want to be part of Europe. So and he starts very. I cannot go into this, and I will stand talk. Anyway, here's his first proclamation that he writes as a young. His idea was then, to put it, while the old Jewish Enlightenment had wanted to speak to the reason of Christian world, I mean, convince them that Judaism is a nice, rational, good religion like yours, and we are entitled to be equal. He said we need to speak to the heart of the Christian world, and we need to do it through art and literature and through Hebrew. He wanted to revive Hebrew as the expression of the Jewish soul to the European world, and thus become an equal part of it, or at least be able to express equally the Jewish soul. You see, this is very much 19th century. He's very much a child of these movements that are around, which Zionism also is part or a child of. Anyway, here is from an article he wrote in 1897, just before the first Congress, and he was full of revolutionary geist, you know. And here is in German, so you can all read it, and I'll read it for you. Sie sind die ersten Europäer in der hebräischen Literatur. Unbefriedigte waren sie alle und Hungrige. Die gebeugte Menschenseele erhob sich in diesen spät geborenen Ghetto, in dieses spät geborenen Kinder. Never mind. Die Kinder und Lechte, ja, und sie lechzte nach Befreiung. So entstand in ihnen die große Europasehnsucht, ein Heißhunger nach Europäertum. This was early in his life, and he would mellow, let's put it that way, but it expresses the dreams, the hopes for being Jewish in a European and contribute to a new Europe. This is what his movement, and that's what he expected from Zionism, by the way. That what he expected from Zionism was a revival of Judaism, not a state per se in the Middle East. So so he becomes very involved in the Zionist movement. This is the invitation in Hebrew for the first Zionist conference in Basel in 1897, and you can see it's signed Dr. Markus Ehrenpreis and Dr. Theodor Herzl. So yeah, sorry, this is no, okay. So but he was, and I will come back to that, he was not a Zionist of Herzl's kind, because he was always much less interested in the political, nation-building part of Zionism, but in the spiritual part and cultural part of Zionism. And this is a Zionism that would be called cultural Zionism. And it had as one of its figureheads a man called Ahad Ha'am. I won't go into this. You need to read this book for that. But I just mentioned that there is another strand of Zionism here, to which Ehrenpreis belongs, and very actively so in the beginning. He's one of the prominent speakers at the Congress, although Herzl sort of denigrates the issue of cultural Zionists to the last day of the Congress, and that pisses him off. Ehrenpreis gets very angry about that. So there is a rift. And there is an interesting, there are many people on Ehrenpreis' side in the beginning. Martin Buber, you've heard of him, was in that group. Actually, Chaim Weizmann, too, in the beginning, was a cultural Zionist. People don't know. And he always remained a bit, in between. Anyway. So, what happens? He becomes a rabbi. He's educated here in Berlin, takes his doctorate here in Kabbalah, and that I cannot go into. And then he becomes a rabbi in Slavonia, which is now Croatia. He chooses between philosophy and becoming a rabbi. Martin Buber, his friend, chooses philosophy. Ehrenpreis chooses to be a rabbi. So he becomes a rabbi first in a small city in nowadays Croatia, and then in 1900 he becomes the chief rabbi, or grand rabbi actually, Chacham Bashi of Bulgaria, the former part, which was just recently actually liberated from or freed from the Ottoman Empire. So it was quite a new nation state, which was quite benevolent to its Jews, and it was a Sephardic Jewish community, if you know anything about Jewish history, a different sort of origin than the German Ashkenazi Jews. But he somehow was recruited and stayed there for 14 years. And his stays in Swedish. Why was that? I can't do that. Okay. Yeah. To Ehrenpreis, the striving for a Jewish future in Palestine was not opposed. This is out of a book, I think. Striving for a Jewish future in Europe. Zion and the diaspora were it should be was to mutually inspire and enrich each other. Jewish life in Bulgaria was not only possible, but desirable. You see here already, he sees a possibility for Jewish life in the diaspora, not in contrast to Zionism, but as part of the Zionist project. Zionism would make Jewish life in the diaspora more vivid, more enlightened, more culturally and spiritually stimulated. That was his thing. I called him early on when I wrote this book. I wrote a paper, actually, which I called Philo of Stockholm. Anyone know who Philo of Alexandria was? Or Philo Judaeus, he was sometimes called. He was a Jewish thinker or philosopher in Alexandria, as you hear, and that was in the 40 before our era. So during the time of the destruction of the temple of Jesus and all that. So he was very much in, and he, to make it very short, he has more be preserved in history by a Christian tradition than by Jewish tradition. Because what he tried to do was to build a bridge between the Jewish Torah, or the Jewish scripture and the Jewish thinking, and the Hellenic Greek word in which he lived. So his writing is very much about explaining to a Greek reading public what Judaism is about, what Moses actually said. So he interprets, somehow also start interpreting the scripture perhaps a bit differently than the rabbis. And but his dream, his vision is to build this. And this is what Ehrenpreis picks up from him. He writes extensively about Philo and why he is a role model for him. And that's a quote here. Philo stands for us as the epitome of noble assimilation. He is not one with feelings of inferiority, detached from his roots, a spiritual beggar, gathering crumbs from the rich surrounding table. He is proudly upright, conscious of his spiritual nobility, harmonious and whole, despite his inner dualism. This dualism is important for Ehrenpreis. How to be a Jew and be part of the larger society. That is his challenge, that he wanted to do. And he, as I say, he saw the road to this, to bring forth, sometimes he said, the true face of Judaism and bring it to the larger world. Tell the world, this is we, this is Judaism, this is what we stand for, and we are part of your word as well, and we want to be part of it. This, I think, was his main. Here is a nice picture. He put very much emphasis, or he thought it extremely important with the foundation of the Hebrew University. He actually had launched the idea already in 1897, or was it 98 at the Congress. But he said that we need also a whole system of secondary schools before we can have a university. Anyway, this is in 1925. He sits up there at the inauguration, or actually the foundation of the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. And if you see, he writes in German, there's a little ish up there, ish to the up the left. That's him. And that's his writing. And there is Adam, his role model, sitting next there. And there is Allenby, is a general, the British general, and Herbert Samuel, the British governor, and they all sit there. And then he writes later, I want to save the people, not the land. That's his cultural Zionism that he summarized. The land is a means, not an end in itself. The more we disperse, the more we need a life-giving point that can bring us together. I want to restore Jerusalem, not as the royal capital, but as the heart of Israel. I will build a people without an army, without a state, without a kingdom, Judaism. Actually puts those words into the mouth of Ezra. He does that in his effort to bring Judaism to the people. He uses the prophets too. And sometimes he quotes the prophets, sometimes the prophets quotes Marcus Ehrenpreis. And he gets criticized for that. But he shies no means to show to the... I will hurry up because we need time for the discussion. So what happens with all this? Well, we all know what happens with all this. Dark times. And he sees it early on, and he reluctantly realized that the bridge he wanted to build will have to be a fortress of defense, because anti-Semitism, Nazism, everything is so he becomes very active, both as a writer, as a rabbi, and eventually also as a leader in Europe, a Jewish leader, one of the few remaining Jewish congregation or Jewish communities that was unharmed by Nazis. Sweden remained neutral. So he could operate, and Sweden became a kind of center of a Jewish world that was slowly being demolished. And also, again, I cannot go into that but it's a big part of this. Now we come to the chapter that is a somber chapter. I describe extensively, actually, what Ehrenpreis did and what the Swedish community did to help the Jews of Germany, the Jews of Austria, and eventually, it's a futile, but it's an energetic but futile effort, because we all know that all countries of Europe closed their borders. There was no exceptions. And whatever people they could save, it was a trickle, of course. But what I show is that they did what they could under the circumstances. They did quite a lot. And Ehrenpreis was very active in this and played this instrumental role in this. And then there is I quote here, a call for help after the war to help the survivors. And then he writes, why do we need to help? Out of compassion, out of a sense of dignity, out of concern for the verdict of the future. This is important. Which will be considering what sacrifices we made to alleviate the plight of our fellow believers in this time of disaster. Now, the problem is that the verdict of Hitler of the future would not be kind to him. It would not be kind to any Jewish leader, I have to say, in Europe at that time. People needed someone to blame for the disaster. Well, the Nazis, obviously, and everyone else who helped them. But there was somehow an urge to also blame Jewish leaders for not having done enough. And so Ehrenpreis became the target of a sinister campaign of defamation. I have to explain, he was a prophet of it. He went his own way, let's put it. He was not good at building alliances. He had his vision, he had his ideas, and he went that way, which meant that when he came into trouble, he didn't have many people to defend him. Especially since the Zionism that he had represented, and which he continued to represent to the very bitter end, had basically lost out to political Zionism in Israel and the founding of Israel. So he was already there a bit isolated. So, and then he had also a problem with some of the Orthodox Zionists. Many people who came to Sweden, the ardent Zionists, were also Orthodox. So there was a whole, you know, slandering of him already way before that he was a bad Jew, basically, in every sense. And I have to say, I save him in this book. This is a restoration of his reputation, because when I started writing this book, he didn't have a good, you know, people, oh, Ehrenpreis, what didn't he collaborate, or didn't he do that and that? Which was absolutely not true. So here we have an excerpt from Jewish Chronicle, 1947, and it quotes one of those people who throw absolutely crazy charges against him, that he had prevented the Swedish government from doing many things, saving Jews, while in fact the Swedish government was extremely harsh, but didn't hesitate afterwards to blame the Jews of Sweden for being more harsh than the Swedish government. So they only did what the Swedish Jews wanted. So this is a whole mess. I'm most proud of this part, because I also tried to, because it was important to me to straighten that story out. And I think hopefully I have at least now this is on record. Okay, the question of Israel. This is the last slide, and we'll go to discussion. This is Ehrenpreis. You see him. This is his last sermon in the Great Synagogue of Stockholm. He's a bit old. He's blind. Those glasses that he puts on there don't serve to make him see better, but to sort of disguise that he doesn't see anything. And he, as I say, he stays to the end by his convictions about Israel, about Zionism. He has a fierce debate with one of the more, also a friend of his, and actually also a very interesting figure, about, that is in 45, so even before the war has ended, about the purpose of Zionism and actually the meaning of Judaism, which to Ehrenpreis was always the spiritual and cultural richness of Judaism, not Judaism as an ethno-nationalist project. To him, the what do you say? The covenant is Sinai. Sinai didn't found an ethnic nationalist sect. It founded an ethnic moral community. That was his sort of basic assertion. So and that he remained faithful to that to the very end. And I end with this quote. Actually, this is a quote from myself, but I can read that anyway. It's from the book. Wars and conflicts are again ripping our societies apart. Authoritarianism, nationalism, xenophobia, and anti-Semitism are again on the rise. Ethnic cleansing is again a la mode, and what Marcus Ehrenpreis termed the question of Israel remains as pressing as ever. Not only has its national answer, a Jewish nation-state in Palestine, failed to deliver on its main promise to solve the Jewish problem once and for all, but it has arguably contributed to a whole plethora. Plethora. Thank you. So I need some natives here for that. A plethora of new Jewish conundrums and challenges. Do you allow me to read a short passage? Because people would ask me, what did this journey mean to you with Ehrenpreis? And I tried to summarize that at the end of the book. So if you allow, I'll read that to you. So what did he leave behind except for a question of Israel? Let me say in a few words what he left to me. He left the traces of a deep and heartfelt love for our common Jewish heritage, its poetic and literary beauty not least, and showed that there was something for me to love as well. He showed me that the Jewish questions he was asking were not questions for Jews only. He asked them from a specifically Jewish experience and a specifically Jewish tradition and gave them a specifically Jewish form. But he never doubted that the Jewish experience and the Jewish tradition had something important to contribute to the non-Jewish world as well. Not least, he wanted to show that Jewish heritage was primarily about upholding an ethical moral obligation and not an ethnic national community. It is true that he saw the obligation as an explicit undertaking of the Jewish people, or for Israel as he preferred, and that this was the meaning of the much misunderstood chosenness, and that a Judaism that did not carry the obligation was not worth preserving. That's how Marcus Ehrenpreis saw it, and that's how I tend to see it too. A Jewish community, deprived of its ethical and moral foundations, may be considered worth preserving for other reasons, ethnic and national, for example, but that is not reason enough for me. A Jewish community kept together by defamation and persecution appeals to me the least. Anti-Semitism, however deadly it has shown itself to be, remains for me an uninteresting reason to be Jewish. An unavoidable reason, perhaps, depending on circumstances, but uninteresting. I will confess that in many Jewish eyes, I would probably be considered a bad Jew. Rules and rituals, however beautiful and meaningful, are not my strong suit. Nevertheless, I feel naturally at home in the Jewish tradition and in the Jewish texts and in the Jewish prayers and in the relation between humans and God that I find in the Judaism of Marcus Ehrenpreis. No, I don't believe there is a God in history or in a God that humans can have any claims on, but I do believe in a God who can make humans assume responsibility for the world we live in. However, we believe that this world has come about, because it's only humans who, for better or worse, have been endowed with the capacity to create the world they live in and destroy it, and to assume responsibility for what they create and destroy. Which for me is the meaning of the basic tenet of Judaism, that humans are created in the image of God. The Jewish faith that Ehrenpreis gave voice to in his radio talk in 1948, a few months before I was born into Judaism, I therefore have no problem making into mine. The question of Israel remains and will always remain, and I hereby add it to my declaration of faith. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Göran, for this presentation of the book. And I think we can immediately move to Susan's comments as a kind of introduction to the discussion.
Yeah, I want to say, can you hear me? Is that working? I want to say a few words about why I think this book really is extremely relevant to certainly the things that Jews are torn up about today, and why other people might be very interested in reading it. It is an easy read, but that's sometimes people say that dismissively, you know, meaning it's not well written. It is well written, and it's well written. The reason why it's easy to read is that it's well written. I have to say, though, that I read it with a slight feeling of melancholy and always with the question, am I going to be one of the losers of history? That is, at a moment when it feels like all of the causes that I have ever fought for and the ideals that I believe in are really threatened, and internationally, not just within Jewish circles. So I kept reading. I want to bring up one or two things. You ended by talking about are being created in God's image. And then you say something that I could have written. As I see it, the idea that humans are created in God's image means that they have been created to take the step from what is to what ought to be. And by doing so, have been given the capacity to fulfill the creation of God. Now, everything that I've ever written about Kant is all exactly about that, which is why there's there were some great Jewish Kantians, from Hermann Cohen to Ernst Cassirer and to Hannah Arendt and many more. We are living in a moment when I would say most Jews in the world have had decades-long friendships ended, enormously painful conversations that are basically, I'm not talking about like a huge ideological split. I'm talking about, at least in my experiences of trying to navigate, deep friendships and not lose them. Are you more worried about anti-Semitism, or are you more worried about the violation of Jewish ethical principles and international law? And on that question, I think the Jewish community internationally is very split. So I think you're right to say that we are in we're in a perilous moment for humankind. Let's, not just for Jews. But it's not as sudden a development, I think. It has roots. Something that I have said over and over and written to, for German audiences that hasn't really come across, that there are two contrasting traditions in Jewish thought or Weltanschauungen, and you can find them all in Genesis, okay? I actually, when I wanted to write something about this, I asked my rabbi to count. This was after Netanyahu made his speech shortly after October 7th, remember Amalek. Now, Amalek was a tribe of genocidal Canaanites, I guess one has to call them now, who, as the children of Israel were wandering in the desert looking for Palestine, did want to attack them. And it says 3 times in Exodus, I guess, the book of Exodus, remember Amalek who tried to kill you, and be beware of any new Amaleks that might come across your way. But so that phrase is repeated 3 times in the Bible. But 33 times, and this is a quote that you give from Ehrenpreis also, it is also said, remember that you were strangers in the land of Egypt. Remember that you were slaves in the land of Egypt. And therefore, it is your duty to treat other strangers well, and the way that you're being treated. Now, that actually, if you count numbers, that universalist tradition, that precisely the fact that we were a persecuted minority, requires us to stand with and by other persecuted minorities, is just as strong in Jewish tradition as the, remember Amalek, they all tried to kill us and they'll do so again. Both of these, by the way, even for Jews who are not particularly biblically literate, both of these ideas come up in the Haggadah, the book that we read for the festival of Passover. So even Jews who are not particularly have heard both of those sides. As you mention, there was this tradition, the Hasmonean Empire, of very fanatical, tribalist Jews. I can't celebrate Hanukkah anymore, actually.
Same here.
I can't.
I have a problem. Yeah.
I just can't. Festival of Lights and all of that, once you actually know who these people were and that they were opposed to everything that people like the three of us stand for, you can't do it. I can always celebrate Pesach because it's a festival of liberation, and you can do all kinds of things with that. But what people in Germany in particular forget is that all of the great German Jews who are mourned and missed, whether, depending on where you come from, Marx, Edward Bernstein, Albert Einstein, Hannah Arendt, I mean, thank you, goes on and on and on. They were universalists. And, you know, as I've been heavily criticized for saying, under the current cultural resolutions, none of those people who are all on postage stamps and, you know, mourned and subject of exhibitions, none of them would be able to speak in a publicly funded German institution. It is true. It's true. So one of the things then that I really liked about this book, and I had no idea, I'd never heard of Ehrenreich, so I entered it blind. I knew Göran from way back, though we haven't seen each other in a while.
No one had heard about him. In Sweden either. He was
in Sweden too.
Obliterated.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
But the idea that you know, in his work in Bulgaria, but also, you know, this is around the time of the First World War. He was again careful to emphasize that their cause was best served by being linked to the cause of all minorities. And this is, once again, an incredibly important point, that all of those Einstein and Arendt and, you know, everybody that we like to be remembered believed really strongly. The first thing that Einstein did on getting to the U.S. was get involved in the civil rights movement. You have a picture of Heschel. Everybody always mentions Heschel. 31% of all the white people who went down to the South during the civil rights movement, at a time when white people were getting killed too in the U.S. South. 31% of them were Jews, so who came out of this tradition. And one of the things that I find so utterly painful about the German discussion of the last 4 years is that it's predicated on a split between Jews and other minorities, when what we need is solidarity. I'm looking at silly Kugelman and remember her, the program that she organized for the 10th anniversary of the Jewish Museum in Berlin, and how much that was in this universalist tradition, because the focus was on, you know, are Muslims being treated the way that Jews were treated earlier, and what can we do to reach out to the Muslim communities? To split, as the discussion has often been in the last 4 years in this country, to split, you know, to say, well, you can't both be on the side of the Jews and on the side of the people of color, because they don't have a word for it in German, and so they often say it in English, is a travesty of what many of us take to be fundamental Jewish values. And I do understand that Germans are confused by their own history and are extremely vulnerable to, what shall I say, the simplistic kind of thinking that we often see in the media and from the government. But if there's a reason for reading this book or being at this event, it's to say that this is not only fatal towards other minorities, it is fatal for the Jews, and it's already causing backlash, and it's already causing anti-Semitism, okay? That to pick out one minority of people who are deserving of government and media protection from all the others is not just causing resentment among other communities who are hurting more than we are in this country. It's also creating the feeling under, you know, nice white Bio-Deutscher, although they very rarely will say it out loud, gee, maybe the Jews really do control the world if we're having this, this much protection and the unconditional support of the United States as well as the Bundesrepublik Deutschland in, defiance of international law. People won't, you hear things between the lines, and anybody who thinks that the current slew of resolutions is protecting the Jews is completely misguided. I want to say a last thing, though, and this is why it's all so difficult. In the chapter where you talk about Ehrenreich's efforts to save Jewish refugees from other countries, is quite tragic. We all know the story, or something of the story, at least as much as publicly known, of Raoul Wallenberg. So for people in the rest of the world, one has a slightly, positive view of what the Swedes did during the war, but of course you showed how brutally they refused to take people in and then blamed the Jews afterwards for doing so. So, this is, I think, where people in our generation and even the next generation are stuck. On the one hand, if anything is valuable in Judaism for us, it is not being a possible victim of a future Holocaust. It is not in the victim tribalist perspective. It's in a universalist ethics. And yet we know that when the chips were down, nobody else really lifted a hand to save the great majority of the Jews of Europe. So we're stuck in that position. I believe, and I would suspect both of you also believe, that the only way out of this is for those of us who still carry on this universalist Jewish tradition to reach out in alliance with other minorities and to make common cause against all forms of racism. There are many places where people will, yell at you if you suggest that Zionism is a form of, that anti-Semitism is a form of racism. Of course, anti-Semitism was different from other forms of racism. No question about that. And the historians and the sociologists and the anthropologists can go on talking about the differences, for the rest of their lives if they want to. Morally, if you discriminate against one group of people because of their birth, it's racism. And the only way to fight it is together. And I'll just end there. And now if I got the message from Elad, he's going to ask us some really difficult questions.
Let him do it.
To which I'm not sure I have any satisfying answers.
I'm sure we can improvise here.
Thank you very much, Susan, for these comments. Before I ask my difficult questions, Göran, would you like to respond?
I think thank you first of all, Susan. That's interesting, and I can only say that I share your view, although I'm a bit darker. I said there is a split now in the Jewish world, and there are very strong forces at play here that enhances it. There are unfortunately many Jews who think that their future lies with the ethno-nationalist camp in the world, with the Netanyahus of the world, with Trumps, with whoever, against the Muslims. The Jews have all allowed themselves to become, in a way, a tool for hitting another minority or another group, another easily or not easily depicted enemy. Trump is doing it so purposefully. This is, don't want to do this in this kind. There is some Hitlerian quality to the way he manipulates people, the fear and hatred towards some other group. the horrible thing is that we have Jewish organizations and representations that are in there doing this with the anti-Semites, because these are core anti-Semitic people. Don't any doubts about that. So this is a horrible constellation of powers, aided, abetted, and stimulated by Israel. Present-day Israel is going there. Netanyahu votes with Russia in the United Nations against Ukraine. It's mind-boggling. I'm very radical now. I'm getting radicalized by the day. I thought I had my radical period. It was way back. But I'm getting there again. I think, and I think in a way, ethical Judaism has been, I don't want to be too pessimistic, but the fact that in the name of Jews and Judaism, you have had a genocide on television, this will not be forgotten, can never go away. That will be part of our legacy as the Holocaust is part of the German legacy. And I don't see how we're going to live with this. My solution, that has been my solution since I was young, because since I discovered that Israel was not what I had hoped for, is solidarity with the Palestinians. And that's where I am now, because that's the clearest expression of the conclusion of our situation. Yes, we have to be solidarized with minorities and all that, fine. But specifically with the Palestinians. Yeah.
Let me say I don't disagree with anything that you say. On the contrary, and I also feel myself being radicalized by the genocide on television, which I think is not legal to say in this country, actually. Or they blip it out.
Oh, my God.
Genocide, apartheid, from the river to the sea, all this stuff. Yeah. But when I'm feeling really hopeless, I don't get up and speak in public. I mean, I feel like if I can't say something, that provides some kind of hopeful orientation, I have no business talking, and I'll crawl into bed. So honestly, I do have days like that. I had recently, I wrote to my friend Avram Burg and said, you're the only Israeli I know who isn't in despair. Tell me something. What's happening? And he texts back, despair, don't know how to spell it. I'm sad and active, okay? But there have been many moments of despair. And of course, Trump's first month in office has made everything worse. If you have not seen the horrible AI-generated 30-second video that he released yesterday, you need to see it.
Yeah.
Thank you, both of you, for these comments. I did prepare some difficult questions, but I would also like to open the discussion. So I'll only ask one of the difficult questions. I think the least difficult one.
Thank you.
And I'll be happy to hear what both of you think about it, and then we can move to your questions in the public, so you can already think what you have to ask. So I just want to basically quote a difficulty that you and you yourself raise in the book, and I think relates to the very title. Saying today another Zionism is, of course, already a provocation in the sense of, people are, the cause is, anti-Zionism. People, are standing against Zionism, Zionism is racism, Zionism is genocide, and so forth. And coming with a critical perspective, but saying, no, it's another Zionism, it's already raises a question. And in the story of Ehrenpreis, you point out at a certain moment to what you call a contradictory element in his views. And I will quote you: on one hand, the diaspora is the existential condition of Judaism, so diasporic vision. On the other hand, the Jewish return to Zion Palestine as the precondition for the survival of Judaism. So there is a kind of...
do I say Jewish return? Yeah, maybe I do that, yeah, okay.
And I agree with you that also reading the book from the very beginning, you know, asking myself, why another Zionism? And to what extent is it even do we need to hold for the to Zionism? So in retrospect, even how important was Zionism or Zion to Ehrenpreis diasporic vision? And you know, he was talking about, as you say, it's the culture dualism, that you need to be a part of the culture you're in, be that Sweden, be it Germany, be it the US, and you also have your other cultural belonging, which is Jewish vision that we already saw in history in the Bund, talking about the Doigkeit and Yiddishkeit, and that Daniel Boyarin recently was talking about this double cultural location. But in all this, where is Palestine? Why is it important to really have, do we really need a center in Palestine to, a Jewish Renaissance? Did we need it? Did Ehrenpreis need it back then? Do we need it today? Where is really Zion?
Yeah, well, this is a very good question. And of course, hindsight, and this is, I emphasize, this was a vision that was grounded in another time. There was a time of potential national, cultural, and spiritual reawakening, not only for the Jews, but this was the atmosphere in the 19th century. They saw the other people, you know, they launched their languages, literature, art, there was this, and there was a Herder was his idea of sort of a community of nations in the world. And they never imagined, I think, the generation of Ehrenpreis, that there will be a state of Israel. They really thought that we need a center of kind of a focus, kind of a pilgrimage place, if you want to say that, a Mecca of the Jews or whatever, something that would enhance, would make the Hebrew language possible, some other things. It's hard. I also say a bit critically about Hadam that it was more obvious what he was critical about than what he really wanted, because that always remained elusive, and I think it still is. But it was a very mobilizing idea, because of course Zion in Judaism has a history. It's a lots of emotion invested in it. And so for the cultural Zionists, there was never talk about any other place, like for Herzl, he could, or the Herzl people in his wake, Uganda was possible, and other places, because they didn't care about Judaism, which Ehrenpreis did. So in order to get this, so Zionism is basically in his circle a movement for Jewish cultural and spiritual reawakening, and they needed that prop, let's put it that way. He was never interested in the actual emigration and state building. That was not his thing. He came to realize, of course, in 38, 39, that was good, that it was, until the Brits closed the borders, that there was a place of refuge. And I guess he was a bit impressed also by what actually the Jewish community in some sense had achieved with the restoration of Hebrew and other things. But it's a good question, and there is no good answer to why he really did that. It has to be understood in its time and in its context. And I don't think there is another Zionism today. There was another Zionism then, but I don't believe there is. There is another, but then you cannot use the word Zionism. I'm still for that there should be a Jewish-Israeli society with Hebrew as its language, its culture. I want, because there are so many good things in it, and many bad things, many good things. So any solution that I will accept must include a Jewish-Israeli society in Palestine, in some, federal organization with the Palestinians. That's always been my idea about this. So and Zionism, as it has become, has become ethno-nationalist, even worse than that. So I think the term itself is becoming polluted.
I agree with you on that, and I want to put it in even more historical perspective. In the generation before Herzl and
Ehrenpreis.
Sorry, I'm so sorry.
That's Barbara Ehrenreich. She's a writer.
No, I know her. I knew her. Sorry, Ehrenpreis. It was this time of progressive nationalism. Probably my very favorite author in the world, who's not as well known to German audiences as she should be, is George Eliot. And her last novel, which apparently played some role in Herzl's thought, it's called Daniel Deronda, and it is it's a plea for Zionism, okay? Yeah. And, a young man discovers he always felt out of it in English society, and he doesn't really know what his, where he belongs, and he finally discovers that he's Jewish. And I won't give it away in case anybody's keen on reading the novel. It's a great novel. Not as great as her greatest, Middlemarch. But the interesting thing is, when you read what she wrote about that and national movements in general, she had a very interesting philosophical idea. She says, human beings need to believe in something larger than themselves. No question about it, okay? In order to be, kind of ethically oriented. Ideally, it would be universalism, but the universal is too big, okay, for, as a direction for ethical aspirations. And that's why she supported, Polish nationalism and this proto-Zionism that she came up with in 1870 before anybody was dreaming of a state. So, the problem is, as both the two of you have mentioned, I think probably the word Zionism has been poisoned by, at the very, very latest, the last 2 years of the Israeli government. So the question is what we call it if we do believe, as I do, and as, well, first of all, it might be trivial what we call it. Some idea of a federal binational state that provides equal justice to Palestinians and Jewish Israelis. But I suppose an even bigger question is how to get there, given, as you say, the deep split in the international Jewish community and the increasing decimation of the Israeli left. I do want to say one thing just because, I'll end here, but I think it's a really important piece of information. To all of those around the world who believe that the reason the U.S. unconditionally supports Israel and sends 2,000-ton bombs and all of that, yes, there is a Jewish lobby, but as Trump himself said, the Jews don't appreciate him. The people who appreciate him are the evangelicals. And I have written about this, I've spoken about it, I once ran a conference on this, bits of several conferences. There are 40 million white Christian evangelicals in the United States. They all vote, and they all, Göran mentions them at the end of his book, they all are so anti-Semitic that what they want is an apocalyptic war in Israel-Palestine, which will bring about the second coming of Jesus, whereupon all the Jews will either convert or go straight to hell. Now, every time I tell this to somebody, I've seen people's mouths drop open. They say, American foreign policy is being steered by that.
Yeah.
But it is. And I realize that, the protocols of the elders of Zion sound more rational Which is why so many people secretly are reviving belief in them. But we do need to understand that there are other forces at work. And, you know, so it isn't just a split in the Jewish community, there are other forces. Israelis all know this, educated Jews know this. Netanyahu has known it for many years, but he says, yeah, they're Meshugana, but we need all the friends we can get. They're not Meshugana. I mean, they are, but it's another thing.
Thank you, Susan and Johan, for these more comments. And I am opening the discussion now for your questions. We do have some time, so Phil.
We are soon ready for your difficult question. No, I'm joking. Okay.
Well, they were all difficult.
Yeah, they were difficult. They were good questions, though. Good questions.
No, you go ahead. Yeah.
I was intrigued by one thing. Thank you very much for your presentation of Preis I never heard of before. And that is the reference to Europe before the First World War in his version of Zionism. I just wanted to know what can you say a bit more about this, because you didn't tell us where Ehrenpreis really came from. Was it Lemberg?
Yeah.
So you grew up in Lemberg as a child, but then was a real European himself. So he was a rabbi in Bulgaria and then ended up in Stockholm and wrote in German. And that's
why I needed to write the whole book about him. Yeah.
He represents himself. But what did he mean by Europe? Was it the same as Susan was talking about the universalism? Was Europe sort of, what he meant by universalism, or is this something more specific which we can learn from? Because I guess this reference to Europe before the First World War has something interesting in it, which might still be relevant for us in thinking about Europe as a reference getting out of nationalism.
Yeah, it's a good question. They used Europe in a very imaginary way. It's very much linked to Bildung. It's a very German, actually, thing in their minds, these people. They want to be part of this world of culture, art, literature, Bildung. And Europa comes to stand in some sense. It's a way, I think, of transgressing nationalist or national definitions of belonging. So Europe becomes, as far as I understand it, for this generation or in this period of time before the First World War, we're talking, this imaginary possibility of a culture that transgresses national borders and it's a kind of a concert of culture. With Hebrew as part of it and the Jews as part of it, yeah, it was a time that people still could dream about another world, another society, and they really did that. So this is very much a story about also people who are have visions and dreams about how things could be. Yeah.
I have to remind you that we met at a series of meetings organized by our mutual friend, another great Universalist Jew, Diana Pinto.
Well, Tony Lehrman also.
But
financed its whole.
But who was actually in the early aughts trying to recreate that idea of Europe and European Jews, and gave it up. But 20 years ago, it was still possible to get Ford Foundation money.
No, that was, yeah. But there was an accusation at the time that Europe was a Jewish idea, and I'm afraid they might have been right. Yeah, to some, there was after the Nazi takeover in Germany, there was an attempt to create a European magazine or a European counterforce to the Nazi propaganda. So they were convened people. Stefan Zweig was there, and it turned out all of them were Jews. Most of them, anyway. So the good European eventually turned out to be a Jew. And I don't know if it is an argument against the idea of Europe or what it is, but unfortunately, the Jews were more eager carriers of this idea than others. That must be said. Yeah.
We have another question there, and then I saw we're there also. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I visited Lviv 10 years ago and came to new knowledge about Judaism in Galicia. And Galicia at that time, at Ehrenpreis time, belonged to Austria that didn't give so much freedom in politics, but in cultural identity. And I think in your book is very much more written on the importance of finding cultural identity by a new thinking about it. And I think that this gave a lot of new chances to Ehrenpreis and all the other Jews in Galicia. And I suppose that going to Bulgaria, as you told us, there was Sephardia Judaism, was a very great difference. Could you please explain a bit more about these differences between Galicia and Habsburg, freedom, and finding another Bulgaria without Ottoman rule?
Very good question. Yes, you're absolutely right about the Austro-Hungarian system, which allowed a lot of cultural freedom in compared to really other parts of Eastern Europe. So that part allowed for much more in that sense. Well, Bulgaria is an interesting thing, actually. And I have to, it was a very more multicultural society than you could imagine. I put as an epigram in the book on the Bulgarian chapter a quote from Elias Canetti, you know, the Nobel Prize winner, a Jew from Bulgaria, and he writes, he was born in Roszczuk, and he writes, this is why I choose this, because Bulgaria was at that time what Ehrenpreis saw as a possibility. It was not yet, it would never be a fierce sort of ethno-national state because it had many people in it. Roszczuk, on the lower Danube, where I came into the world, was a marvelous city for a child. And if I say that Roszczuk is in Bulgaria, then I'm giving an inadequate picture of it. For people of the most varied backgrounds lived there. On any day, you could hear 7 or 8 languages. Aside from the Bulgarians, who often came from the countryside, there were many Turks who lived in their own neighborhood, and next to it was the neighborhood of the Sephardim, the Spanish Jews, our neighborhood. So it was, and to Ehrenpreis, it was a successful period. There was this period they built also the great synagogue in Sofia. It was inaugurated in 1909, and that was Ehrenpreis' work. So there was, and he was good friends with the king, so that's how it worked. So one can't blame him for hoping or seeing a possibility in this of a Jewish Renaissance in the context of such a state. But he was also aware, which comes later after when the Balkan Wars start in 1912 and 1913, and Bulgaria becomes involved in this another war with the Ottomans, where they want to grab more territory, that the Jews in the Ottoman Empire had it better. He knew that he had to tell the Jews in the new places which Bulgaria had conquered, had to promise them that they would be treated well, because they had been treated well, not only in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, but in the Ottoman Empire, comparatively, relatively to how they were treated in most parts of the nation of Europe at that time.
Yeah, I'd like to just ask a question about the concept of the diaspora. I guess the book was written a few years ago, so a few years before 7th of October and the destruction we've seen afterwards. and I think it's like probably in the last chapter you talk about not necessarily expanding on it, but you talk about the vitality of the diaspora and sort of the multiplicity of the diaspora and a sort of potential. Do you still feel that way? Is there still a viable concept? I mean, because in light of the, let's say, subordination that we've seen in sort of mainstream Jewish institutions to the state.
I was more optimistic a few years ago. I was. After Gaza, I'm more pessimistic because what has happened with Jews in the world is they have lost. I mean, what kept Judaism going? It was, of course, a tradition, a spiritual, liturgical, historical community that was kept together. The people of the book was a certain truth to that. Now, with modernity, it has become much more difficult to say what is a Jew, except that you were born of a Jewish mother. And there has been the temptation to define yourself in an ethno-nationalist way, that you are a kind of people, with Israel basically as your identity. So Israel that has become very much an identity thing. And I don't see what can replace it. I know that Daniel Boyarin has proposed something, but I don't think that will work. Kind of a more spiritual or Talmudic-based Judaism that will take its place. There is a very strong, vibrant Jewish community in the U.S. and that's the ultra-Orthodox, but it's not the Judaism I am looking forward to. I hope someone can convince me I'm wrong, but yeah, so okay, Susan will do that. Yeah.
Well, look, I mean, I'm not Pollyanna, but like I said, if I can't say something hopeful, I don't speak in public. First of all, what I think is interesting about the fact that Germans want to define Jews halakhically, solely by religion, solely by, in particular, whether you're born of a Jewish mother. And they consider that calling Jews a people, or God forbid, a race, is anti-Semitic. And so they turn to this religious definition. Only a people who could think you get rid of racism by striking the word race from the Constitution would come up with this idea. The fact is, there is a Jewish people, and I don't understand it any better than anybody else does, okay? As the famous banal joke goes, 2 Jews, 3 opinions. But there is a recognizable Jewish people, and I have to say, I just came from spending 3 weeks in South Africa, where the vast majority of white people who were against apartheid, who lost lives, lost their limbs, were Jews, okay? And there's still an active community of people there. It's also split, like every Jewish community in the world, about how strongly to support Palestine. But it's still there. It's certainly strong in the U.S. among people who are not, religious Jews, or at least not Orthodox Jews, but are trying different forms of Jewish practice of some kind without its being traditionally religious. So it exists. I agree with you that everything has gotten harder after October 7th. It is a real, watershed in history and in Jewish history. But I don't think by any means that the diaspora is dead, and in particular that this universalist activist tradition in Judaism is dead. It's alive. And actually, many of the kids who are protesting at American universities and getting arrested in various things are Jewish. So
Thank you.
Thank you, Susan.
Thanks for speaking, hopefully.
Are there any other questions? Yes. I think that will be maybe our last question.
I have a question because when you talk about Zionism and Judaism, and you mentioned the first Zionist Congress. So actually, if you follow the history from that point of view, thinking about the conflict today, actually it was a mistake. The Congress was a mistake. The Zionistic movement at that time was a big mistake. Actually, the Jews shouldn't have had the aspiration to go back to Palestine at that time. So that's the consequence. So I think instead of talking about changing Zionism and Judaism, so the political development in the Middle East, actually, from that time where the Jews decided, or some of them, they should go back to that land, it was not empty. So there were Arabs there, and you know that from the beginning of the 20th century, that was a revolt, not only against the nationalistic movement, and since that time, actually, more than 100 years, there is always a conflict between the Jews or the Israelis and the Arabs. So when you talk about another Zionism and Judaism, you don't consider anything about the whole conflict there. You talk about kind of, yeah, it's true that there is a humanistic movement and that should be kept and so on. But you cannot separate, because every nation in the world which was created was not just created, somebody came and say, okay, now you live here, you are in peace and so on. So there is a conflict there, and it's not fair when all the conflict between the Arabs and the Israelis are concentrated today on Netanyahu, because he was not living in 48, he was not yet born at that time, and not in the so you have, when you talk, I did not understand what you mean.
I asked you to get to the question, because we need
Listen, I hear what you say. This is not the only book I've written. There is another book on Israel, which you should read. It's all in there. You can say, argue, was it a mistake? I can say, if they had known, 1897, if they had seen the pictures of Gaza, 2000, 2005, 25, yes, all of them would say, no, let's not go there. They didn't know. There were many of them at the early point. Even Ahad Ha'am was very aware of the Arabs and said, we cannot go there thinking that this is an empty land. He said, we have to. Everybody, they knew that. So there is an awareness in the beginning that we cannot go straight there. And I write extensively about that in the other book, which is in German, by the way, so you can read it there. And I chronicle that story. I don't find it very interesting to go back in history, oh, that was a mistake. Yeah, Hitler was a mistake too. But, you know, you have to go to the time, live with the people who lived at the time, try to understand why they did what they did, find their motivations. You can afterhand come and say, well, that was wrong. Yeah, but with what right do you go back in the time to try to tell people to do otherwise? You cannot. You have to be, as an historian, you have to understand why people did certain things, why they made certain choices. And this is why I try to do in this book. I try to go back in another time when people saw things differently, didn't know all about that. But again, as I said, the Zionism at that time that he represented was a different one. It was represented by other people, not hers. It was Buber, there was, I chronicled them, there was Hugo Bergman, there was all these people. they had other ideas than a nation state of it. They wanted a binational state. They wanted all kind of federations. You had Judah Magnus, the rector of the Hebrew University, was very, very strongly for a federation and all that. That you can discuss. But to go back and say, oh, they made a mistake in 1897 doesn't make sense, because we don't know how things looked at 1897. Also, one more thing to say. Israel, when I write it also, what Israel became and how it became what it became cannot be, it should have, the founders of the Zionists never imagined Holocaust. They never imagined that a majority of the European Jewry would be killed. Of course, that had an impact on what became out of this whole project. And I don't think the impact was good. I think the impact was bad. But I don't know. So history is full of these things that we can contemplate, try to understand, but moralize about the past, I don't do. So don't have the right to.
The conversation is not over. It just begins on Göran's book. I invite you all to stay. There is outside wine and pretzels, so we can continue the conversation. Before that, help me please thank Göran Rosenberg for being with us. Susan Neiman, thank you very much. And thank you all for being with us tonight.